Hello there. Welcome to another installment of Chuck's Captivating Chat, the edition for August 12th, 2024. I hope I got my date correct there. That would be a little embarrassing. Probably not the least embarrassing thing I've done on the air. Anybody who's ever done shows like this will tell you they've made their share of mistakes and errors, but that's part of the fun of YouTube. I'm told I have been assured that you don't have to be so professional and polished, that people actually like you to be human on these things. So you definitely get the very human side of me. That's for certain. We had an earthquake today. I mean, in capital letters, like that 1974 disaster film, earthquake. I was sitting here recording a voice memo for a friend of mine. She likes to communicate that way, where she'll record me a long memo. I'll record her one because our lives tend to be rather busy and it's kind of hard to sometimes sit down and have a phone conversation where it's two-way. So I'm right in the middle of this conversation, recounting some things, some projects I'm working on, and all of a sudden, please started rattling. I could hear things falling off of shelves. I could see pictures moving on my wall, and it's not that I'm so scared by, oh, hi Ward, hi Kathy, thank you for joining. It's not that I'm so frightened by earthquakes. I've lived in Los Angeles 39 years. They're just a way of life here. You get used to them, and I have to say 99% of the time I have not had any substantial harm or anything like that, but they can be scary when they hit because you don't know how long they're going to go on, and you don't know how intense they're going to remain. And in today's case, this was intense when it hit. It was like almost a boom, and it went on. I later found when I saw the news report, it was only 10 seconds. But I can tell you it felt a lot longer than 10 seconds because it just kept going and going and going, and you don't know how long it's going to last. And that's the scary thing. If you never know when it's going to be one of those earthquakes that is going to go on like 30, 40 seconds or something. And that's where they start to do a lot of damage, and when they just keep shaking your home. I'm lucky. I live in a really fantastic old apartment. This building was created in 1941. I understand it opened up 2 months before World War II started, but it was built in a very good, substantial way. I mean, obviously, my whole neighborhood, Las Feliz, is comprised of wonderful architecture from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and everything is still standing. And obviously, these buildings have been through many, many, many prior earthquakes. So they knew how to build these buildings to bend and flow and still stand, because my building, as you can see, is still here. But I moved into this building initially because it was old. I loved it for the character, Art Deco crown molding, a beautiful Art Deco fireplace, French windows. I'd always wanted a place like this. And, it's held up. It's been good for me. But today was a little frightening. I had a number of text messages from friends on the East Coast. It's always people on the East Coast. Are you okay? Oh my God, I saw on the news. No, it wasn't that bad. I think why it was so intense was I found out it was centered in Pasadena, which is only a few miles from where I live. So even though it was only a 4.7, it felt more intense than I think. I think the Northridge quake, that's the worst one I've ever gone through. I think that was a 7.1. If I'm not mistaken. That was the one that rattled us at 4:31 a.m. And I had a lot of glass broken. I had a beautiful new console table. I had just bought it 6 weeks earlier. It was my first piece of grown-up furniture instead of secondhand stuff from the thrift stores and all, as many of us are when we're young adults. This was a beautiful, expensive piece of bona fide adult furniture. And I remember compact discs? It sounds almost primitive now to talk about it, but I had one of those towers with all my compact discs in it. The earthquake caused all of those CDs to pew, 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 fly out like bullets. And those cases with the sharp edge corners all went whack, whack, whack right into my beautiful console table, just denting and chipping the Jesus out of that beautiful table. And I learned from the Northridge quake, it's not just about securing things so they don't fall, but also trying to second guess how things will fall, because sometimes you'll do more damage just from things falling down onto something else, or in this case, the CD tower and all the CDs flying out, which never occurred to me could happen. Well, yes, it can. And it was also dark. The power went off. It was 4:30 in the morning. The phone rang before my phone service stopped, and this was before cell phones. It was January of 1994. It was my mother, frantic, because she was back on the East Coast watching the Today Show. And I can tell you, the news media loves to, big surprise here, they love to sensationalize things. So never mind, most of the city was fine. They focused on this bridge that had collapsed, and the news kind of implied that LA was buried in rubble and it was chaos and cacophony and fires everywhere. And so my mother was worried out of her mind. And I was like, Mom, I just want to go back to bed and go back to sleep. I've got to go to work today. I'm fine. But then I had some other people getting in through me also. Let me look at some comments here. Oh, was Sasha okay? Yeah, she was okay. She was just in the kitchen. She's like me. She's been through many quakes. It's like, yawn. Let's see. Ward, hello, Chuck, hello, Kathy. We don't get earthquakes in my neck of the woods, although the worst recorded earthquake in U.S. history happened about 200 miles from my house. Well, I was going to bring that up because, I'm originally from a small town in Virginia. And, that region of the country is not supposed to be earthquake country at all. But yet, 2 days ago, they had an earthquake. Interesting. And I can remember when I was a kid, many years ago, we had a 5.0 quake there. It's where I'm from, it's very mountainous. And so naturally, where there are a lot of mountains, there are going to be faults. So once in a while, they do get hit back there. Well, I remember when I was a little boy, our house just started shaking, and my mother and father were frantic, and we thought our furnace was blowing up. And I remember we started to run out of the house when the quake stopped. And thankfully, we didn't have any aftershocks or anything, but there were some cracks. A few of our walls. I remember our basement wall. There was a very noticeable crack that came from it. And I talked to other people who went through this. And I've also heard in New York City, Washington, D.C., that area, they've gotten some quakes. So, and Ward, you just mentioned where you're from. I think in Missouri. Is that correct? Yeah, and I have heard of earthquakes hitting Missouri. I don't know if we're safe anywhere. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that, because obviously, as you can see, I'm sitting here. My home's a mess right now. If I were to flip this laptop around and show you my living room, oh my God, believe me, I'm hiding a multitude of sins right now. That's the beauty of positioning a camera lens just so. Ward, you're asking how the Playhouse, I'm assuming you mean the Pasadena Playhouse. Well, I'm assuming it's okay. I watched the news coverage this afternoon, and they mentioned that it was centered in South Pasadena, but nothing was said about the Playhouse or really any mention of any structural damage of note anywhere. So I'm assuming it's okay. I love the Pasadena Playhouse, by the way. I haven't been there in quite a while. It's a lovely venue. Yeah, 100 years old this year. That's right. I forget 100 years ago was the 1920s, and a lot of things here in LA came about in the 20s. The 1920s, of course, was the heyday of the silent movie era, but that was when Hollywood and movies were becoming very big, and as a result, Los Angeles was becoming big. There was a synergy with the movie industry, and so a lot of things came up. And I didn't think about that with the Pasadena Playhouse. Um, oh, Kathy's in the Show Me State, Missouri. Okay. Well, I don't want to violate your privacy and ask what state you're in, but anyway, it's just all over the country, and people back east will ask me, well, are you afraid of the earthquakes? Well, no. And in fact, when I see the Midwest and the East Coast, and I see all the cyclones and the tornadoes, the people along the Eastern Seaboard, all the hurricanes, we here in LA actually have it thus far pretty good. I say that like knocking gently on wood or whatever my counter service is here, because you just never know. You never know, but we, hope everybody stays safe regardless. Anyway, I thank you so much for joining me today. I generally keep these shows a little more free form because I've seen in the last few weeks, sometimes one of you will ask me a question or bring up a topic, and I start talking, and it's like, whoa, there's my show for the day. But I was thinking some things to cover, and I thought, well, the earthquake is definitely something, and we're, of course, going through a wretched heat wave right now. I don't spend a cent on heating in the wintertime. It just doesn't get cold. I mean, it gets chilly in LA, but my home stays pretty warm. It's pretty well insulated. But where I spend my money is on air conditioning. I spend a fortune on air conditioning. Being in an upstairs apartment, and this being an older building, if I didn't run my air, this would be like an attic. It would just be unbearable. War, did I ever meet Ava Gardner? I am so sorry to say no, I didn't meet Ava Gardner. I'd love to have met her. She was a North Carolina native. I'm a Virginia native. So I think her where she grew up was about 100 miles or so from me, and I know she's buried there right now. On one of my previous shows, I told the story about Ava Gardner's autobiography and how she had an open letter to one of her husband, Artie Shaw. And of course, I knew Evelyn Keyes, who was also the former Mrs. Artie Shaw. And I gave her the book so she could give it to Artie so he could read Ava Gardner's final message. And apparently he had not seen it before. So I did facilitate that. But that's as close as it comes to any association with Ava Gardner. Speaking of earthquake, she's an ex of Mickey Rooney. Oh my God, who wasn't an ex of Mickey Rooney? The man had 8 wives. It's actually quite fascinating when you look at all of these these cross marriages between all these celebrities, like Ava Gardner, Mickey. Talk about disparity. Mickey Rooney and Frank Sinatra were two. I don't know if she was married more than those 2 times, but and then Ava. No, wait, what am I thinking? Ava, Artie Shaw, Frank Sinatra, Mickey Rooney. I forget who else. Mickey. Oh God. Well, that's not the show I want to do today, but maybe that's a future show. Just doing all the cross marriages between people. But let's see, last week I was talking about, what's this? I didn't know they were married. Yes, they were married. I think that was Mickey Rooney's first wife. I think for both of them, that was their first marriage, their first of many. And it was seemingly an odd pairing. But at the time, you have to remember, Mickey Rooney was the #1 box office draw in America. Little 5'3" teenage Mickey Rooney was the #1 box office draw. It's interesting. Before Mickey Rooney, hi Joyce, thank you for joining. Before Mickey Rooney, little Shirley Temple had been the #1 box office draw. Bigger, I mean, literally bigger than Jean Harlow, Clark Gable, Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford. It was little Shirley Temple was the number one box office draw. And before her was an elderly woman named Marie Dressler, who for 2 years was the number one box office draw. So an elderly woman, sorry to say an old woman, an elderly woman, a little girl, and a teenage boy. Those were the biggest stars in Hollywood. So Ava Gardner was a new contract player at MGM. She was up and rising. And, I'm assuming they were in love, but it was also advantageous to her, certainly from a career point of view, to marry Mickey Rooney and have the prominence of being married to the number one box office draw. So that's anyway. Ward mentioned Miss Dressler co-starred with Garbo in her first talkie, Anna Christie. That's absolutely correct. And she was marvelous. Marie Dressler, she had a period where she was big in silent movies, probably most famously in 1914 with Charlie Chaplin, a film called Tilly's Punctured Romance. And Marie's career went south, really went down in her latter years. And at one point, she was working as a housekeeper. And it was almost by accident that she stumbled back into movies. And it was really that film with Garbo that put her back on the map. She made quite an impression in that role. And MGM started putting her in starring films like Men and Bill with Wallace Beery. She was in Dinner at 8 with Jean Harlow. And she won a Best Actress Oscar. She became huge. She became a superstar after the age of 60. And then, unfortunately, she had cancer and she died at the age of 64 at the peak of her career. But it was just proof that you can be at any age and find the success that maybe had eluded you earlier. It definitely came to Marie Dressler. Lovely lady. I wish her films were revived more. She was just a splendid character actress. But anyway, I've just been working on a number of projects. I just, I've mentioned that I've been rerunning some pieces, some older videos, simply because I've needed to work on some other projects, some art projects, some writing projects. Anyone who has ever done a YouTube channel and really devoted themselves to it will tell you it's a lot of work. At one point, I was putting as much as 8 hours a day into this, and it was consuming me. And just for my own sanity, I needed to, I don't want to say take a break from it, but I needed to cut back for a while. I've stuck with the Monday show, and I do try to get at least one video up a day. Usually it's something older. Occasionally I shoot a new piece. I have every intention of going back to shooting a lot of new pieces again. I have a whole list of topics. I have some things that I've semi-scripted already, but just for right now, I've needed to do this. I put up something yesterday that I had actually forgotten about doing, and it hadn't been that long ago because it was something done for Carol Burnett's birthday in April. And I joined forces with my dear friends Joyce Petrus and Pam of Pomona Remembers. And she's a wonderful astrologer, numerologist. She has her own show, Mystic Souls Insight. She's in the audience right now. And for Carol Burnett's birthday, the three of us collaborated on a 2-hour special celebrating the life of Carol Burnett. And last week I did a show where I talked a lot about Carol Burnett and going to CBS. And so I talked about those, and Joyce did Carol Burnett's astrological chart. Pam talked about how Carol Burnett had affected her life. We all shared stories of how Carol Burnett's laughter had healed us so much. And I was looking through my videos, like, what am I going to rerun today? And I saw the 2-hour special. I thought, this deserves to be put out again. This was a good show. It deserves to be seen. And I don't know how many people, I forgot to check how many people watched it the first time, but let's see how it does the second time around. Looking at my comments here. Uh, oh yeah, that shaky suspension bridge in 1940. I think that was in Washington State. I've seen that newsreel footage. It I could be wrong on this, but I think that bridge was a replica of the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't think it was painted orange like the Golden Gate Bridge, but it was that same type of suspension bridge. Very, very similar. I think the same architect, engineer who designed it did this. And I've seen that footage of the bridge just swaying in the wind, and the whole thing came down. Thankfully, nobody was on the bridge. I think it was a day or two before they were going to have the opening ceremony, which could have been cataclysmic. Let me see here. What are some other comments here? Oh, Kathy, thank you. Thank you for saying you look forward to these live shows. Kathy, that touches my heart tremendously. Thank you for saying that. Really appreciate all of you. Let's see here. Any mention of Miss Burnett's encounter with Elvis on Ed Sullivan? No, and I should look into that. I know Carol Burnett mentioned her encounter with Barbara Streisand. I think it was Carol Burnett used to be a regular in the Gary Moore show, and Barbara Streisand was a guest, and she said she stood in the wings just out of camera range watching Barbara, fascinated, listening to that glorious voice. This was when Barbara was young, like 19, 20 years old, and Carol Burnett said that has to be the most beautiful gift God ever gave anybody. But in fact, Ward, maybe you know the story about Carol Burnett and Elvis. I'd have to look that up. I know that Carol Burnett did Ed Sullivan's show several times, as did Elvis. That'd be great. It'd be great. It was in Tacoma, Washington, where the bridge was. Let's see. They didn't account for the wild winds in the Narrows. They now have two bridges across the Narrows. I like to think they learned from that tragedy, learned what not to do, and to take into account things like the winds, which really surprises me they did not do. Anybody who's ever been on the Golden Gate Bridge will tell you it is very, very solid. I've walked across it, going one way and then going the other way, and I was expecting the bridge to shake or sway a little bit. No, steady as a rock solid, that bridge. That was one of the impressions I had of it. And by the way, I suggest this: if you ever are in San Francisco, everybody should walk across that bridge at least one time. It's stunning. You're up just above the clouds, and you have the most spectacular view of San Francisco. And below you, you can see ships passing underneath the bridge. Don't mean to get off too much of a tangent here. Julie Andrews was on the Gary Moore show. We know that Carol Burnett and Julie Andrews famously did the Carnegie Hall special in 1962, but I was surprised when I started looking at shows on YouTube to see that Julie Andrews was on Gary Moore's show several times, and I bet you that was at Carol Burnett's insistence, because they had formed quite the friendship by that point. And that story has been told by both Julie Andrews and Carol Burnett. I think Julie Andrews put it this way. One of the times she told the story, we were both Broadway royalty. Me, Carol Burnett was doing Once Upon a Mattress, playing the princess, and Julie Andrews was doing Camelot. So they were both royalty. And it was at I think their mutual agents or friends or someone just said these two ladies should hook up. They would really get along. So it was a double date. And as Carol and Julie have laughingly said, those two men who were with them just did not have a chance. Poor guys got left behind because they went out to a Chinese restaurant or something, and Julie and Carol they just they were like two houses on fire. They started talking and talking and talking and talking, and I think they here it is more than 60 years later. They're still talking. Just two very different women, but yet so much alike. And they said a lot of it had to do. They both grew up poor. And they understood that. They had just an understanding, having shared similar experiences. Let's see. I'm looking at some other comments here. Let's see. So anyway, last week, of course, that was the theme of my show. I was talking about CBS. It originally grew out of the farmers market, and I was telling the story about Bob Carroll Jr. and Madeline Davis. They were going through a dry spell, and they couldn't come up with an idea for a new show for Lucy. And they were having a meeting at CBS. They walked over to the farmer's market to get some lunch. They saw the chocolate dipper. Guess what episode that inspired? So I was telling that, and I didn't get to tell the stories about CBS, how I would go over there back in 1991 when Carol Burnett revived her variety show. It only lasted 6 weeks, unfortunately, but she did it on Stage 33, just like she used to do the old Carol Burnett show from 1967 to 1978. So I would get there in line every week, and I managed to make it to 5 of the 6 tapings of the Carol Burnett show. And I didn't, because the show went on so long. And as I see right now, I've almost gone through my half hour here. I was going to say, well, one of my other experiences was CBS. Well, actually, no, I just remembered another big experience I had, but there's, okay. I actually had a meeting at CBS. Yes, me. I had a business meeting at CBS once. It was when Bart Andrews and I were trying to sell our I Love Lucy book. And we had a meeting with a wonderful man named Marty Garcia. He was the vice president in charge of licensing for CBS. And we wanted to do this right because the world had changed quite a bit since Bart's first book back in the 70s, when you didn't need to do this. Now you do something like this. You do have to have licensing. And it's much harder to do a book about Lucy and I Love Lucy now, because you've got to pay royalties to Lucille Arnaz and Desi Jr., their children, because they own the rights to their parents' images. CBS, I don't know what it is now. At the time, you had to pay a 15% licensing fee to them for the rights to do a book about I Love Lucy, rights to use the logo, to use photographs, what have you. So anyway, I had a meeting at CBS, and I was always very proud of that because I'd never done anything like that before. I didn't have the confidence in myself that I could do something like that. And this is where Bart Andrews was a great mentor to me. He assured me, you know what you're doing. You can handle this. I told you he had suffered a stroke that had affected his ability to speak. And he went to the meeting with me, but he wanted me to more or less conduct it. But I thought, well, surely Bart will speak up. No, Bart stayed quiet. He let me do the whole meeting by myself. It was like a 3-hour meeting. And I was in my element. And I loved it. And I was always grateful to have that confidence. And, I've shared that we ultimately, because of politics, because of expenses, publishing expenses, legal expenses, we ended up not selling the book. We came very close, almost got Random House to buy it. But anyway, I had the meeting at CBS. So whenever I go by CBS on Beverly Boulevard in Fairfax, I can say, I had a meeting there once. But another time I was there, and what I was originally going to tell, my sister came out here from Colorado for a visit. And she was here for a couple of days. And if any of you are familiar with the Grove Shopping Mall, which is right next to the farmer's market, we ended up spending the whole 2 days at the Grove. Well, at the farmer's market. She always liked to go to the farmer's market because it's a fun place to go to get things to eat and snack on and just walk around. They're wonderful tchotchke little gift stores and things. It's fun. But now they have the whole Grove Shopping Mall with the trolley car and all that. And then there are movie theaters there and restaurants. It's very easy to spend a day there. And they had a sushi restaurant at the time. It was all you could eat, a lunch special for $20. $20, and it was where they had a chef, preparing little sushi dishes, and they had a conveyor belt. And the rule was you couldn't take more than 3 little dishes at a time, but you could eat all you wanted, which my sister and I proceeded to do. It was one of the most gluttonous afternoons of my life. I have never consumed so much sushi, and we were so full that we were practically waddling when we got out of there. And my sister was always a fan of, this was when Craig Ferguson used to host the Late Show on CBS before James Corden took over. And now there's some crappy game show or something on right now. I'm not to impugn the show, but not that good. But anyway, my sister said, "Oh, that's CBS. That's where Craig Ferguson does his show. Let's get tickets." And I said, Kathy was saying, wow, $20 for all you can eat. Well, I want to throw this out. That restaurant is long out of business. And I think that's why they went out of business, because you can't give away that much food for $20 and sustain yourself. That's what happened. But anyway, I said to my sister, it's usually you can't get into these shows the same day. It's that easy. He said, "Oh, come on, let's try." So we went over to the concierge desk. Lo and behold, there were tickets available. I warned my sister way many times. They overbook these things, and because they want to fill the seats. But she said, "Oh, come on, let's go. So so there I was once again at CBS in line, and we got in, and we had to go up several flights of stairs. And I was shocked because, like Carol Burnett's show was done in a great big theater studio. Anybody's watched Carol Burnett's show, no, that's a big theater, sets, audience, for the audiences, the soundstage. Craig Ferguson's show was done in a room. It was, he had an intimate audience of about 100 people. And it was basically just a large size room turned into a sound stage, lights overhead and everything. But I was astounded how they made it look so much larger on television. That's the illusion of the cameras, and you can use widescreen lenses and things. The same thing is true for the Dolby Theater, where they do the Academy Awards. I was there last year. I was there for it was Kelly Ripa and her show. She now does it with her husband Mark. At the time, it was still being done with Ryan Seacrest, but it's 6 a.m. Well, they still had the set up for the Oscars from the night before, and I was there for it because I had my wonderful friend Mary Rappaport, who owns Lucille Ball's childhood home, and I did paintings for her, for the house of the Ball family. My paintings are in Lucille Ball's childhood home in the living room. I'm very, very proud of that. She came out for a visit and she wanted to go, so that's what we did. And I only bring this up because that theater is so much smaller than it looks on television. I swear, it's like half the size it looks on television. And they do this because they have overhead cameras and they have the wide angle lenses and things, which creates this illusion of it being much larger. Well, that's what they were doing with Craig Ferguson's show. You would never know it was being done in a little room-sized studio. And so we went there, and I swear the audience warm-up must have gone on for at least an hour. They always have a comedian come out to get the audience, get the spirits up, get everybody laughing, getting everybody enthusiastic before the show starts. That's a common thing done before comedies and before variety shows. But this went on and on and on and on. And my sister turned to me and said, "This doesn't feel like a free show anymore. I feel like I'm being used." But we got to see the taping of the show. They taped the show at 5 p.m. to air later that night. Let me see. It aired on the East Coast, 8:30, 11:30 here. So they taped at 5 p.m. So it was basically 3 hours or so before it was going to be seen on the East Coast. And it was all right. We were hoping there was going to be a big name guest star. His guest for the night was the Mexican president, Vicente Fox. And there was some B-list actress whose name I have long since forgotten. But it was nice that I could give my sister that experience. And I always love it when anybody comes out here to visit me in Los Angeles, because there are fun things to do like that, like going to see a show being recorded and whatever, or hoping you'll run into a movie star. It seems like every time my sister would ever come out here, we would never find one single celebrity. So maybe one day I can introduce her to somebody. It's one day. So let's see, are there any real, let me see here. Let's see, Ward, what did you say there? Those paintings are really lifelike. Are you talking about my Lucille Ball paintings? I hope so. Anyway, I'm very proud of that. I did Lucy's mother, Dee Dee, and oh yeah, those paintings are really cool. I'm so sorry, Ward. When the comment is at the bottom of the scroll here, part of it gets blocked off. Thank you. Yeah, I did Lucy's little brother Fred when he was 3.5 years old. I did Lucille Ball when she was about 8 years old, and then I did her grandparents. And yeah, I that's an accomplishment that's always going to mean a lot to me, knowing that 100 years after Lucy and her family lived in that house, now my presence is in there and it's on those walls. Yeah, I'm grateful. So let's see here. I've been on almost 40 minutes now. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to talk about. I've just been had some notes here, but I'll save these for another show. But I've just been working very hard on a number of projects. I showed the Shirley Temple painting I'm working on. I've got something in. Usually I don't show stuff when it's in beginning stages, because the way I paint, I add details on top of details, just layers and layers and layers. And a lot of people don't understand this when I'm talking about it until I just have it and I can literally show it. But I am working on a painting of Betty Davis right now. And this fur coat is driving me crazy right now. I should not have taken this on. This is the third time I've done a painting of somebody wearing a fur coat, and in this case, a fur hat. Those two other paintings were portraits of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz on their wedding day, when Lucy was wearing a silver fox fur and hat. And the first time I did that, it was for a formal commission for someone in Ohio who wanted this. She wanted a great big painting. And I said, sure, I can do that. Not realizing how hard that coat was going to be to paint. All those little strands, one by one, by one, by one, by one. And then I did a second painting to go with that. And I thought, well, okay, I've painted this fur coat now, so I've mastered it. I shouldn't be so hard to do it the second time. Wrong. Just as hard the second time. Just as difficult, and just as I'm finding with Betty Davis right now, just as maddening. But when this painting grows up, I'm hoping it's going to be nice. And I'm also hoping it's going to go with the Shirley Temple. I'm not at liberty to talk about this yet, but other than it's a landmark place in Hollywood where I may have a show of Hollywood art. I don't know. I have to have a meeting. A lot has to be discussed, and so I don't want to go further into it right now. I'm not going to tell more until something actually does happen. Yeah, Betty liked reminders of her New England cold weather, but I think in that case, stars often just had to do what the studios told them. Like this was from a 1939 glamour portrait setting. I don't think it was with George Horrell. I'm trying to remember. It was pretty much of that caliber, and it was to promote her movie Dark Victory. And Betty always claimed she was not into all the makeup and the hair and the glamour. I was a serious actress, you know. She always claimed she was not into the glamour girl thing, but I think secretly she did like it, and I think secretly she was a little envious of the actresses who were glamorous, like arch rival Joan Crawford. Betty would often put Joan down for that, saying, well, I was the real actress. Well, I'm sorry, Betty. Joan was a very good actress also. But anyway, that's another topic. But Betty was on Johnny Carson once. And, obviously when she was near the end of her life, and she was talking about how she never saw herself as very beautiful. She never saw herself as glamorous. And then she paused and said, yes, but now I look at my old movies and I say, I was a beautiful young thing. I was divine. So she had an appreciation for it. Joyce, I've experienced many earthquakes in my life. I have too. I've lived in Los Angeles 39 years, and I think I even mentioned, at the beginning of the show, even back in Virginia, I experienced one there. But they just become a way of life. The news media exaggerates them and all, but I've been okay. Ward asked, did Sasha get antsy before the quake? No, she didn't. She didn't. Very blasé about the whole thing. She was just in my kitchen. Just kind of went back to sleep, if anything. And I think I told this once before. This was when we had, this was, I think in 1988, I had lived in LA maybe 3 years at the time. And this was the first big quake I'd ever gone through. And I remember I was watching the Channel 4 news there, and the newscaster, this man named Kent Shocknick, I think was his name, he dove underneath the desk. Earthquake. He got under the desk, and he got criticized for that. People were calling him a coward and a wuss, but it turns out he did the right thing, because they had those big studio lights overhead. Those things could have crashed down on him. He did the right thing getting underneath his desk, but he got ridiculed for it. And I remember, like a year or two later, there was another trembler while he was on live reading the news, and he just sat there and he said, I'm not moving this time. Because he remembered the flack he took before. But anyway, the reason I'm telling that story, supposedly animals can sense an earthquake before it's going to happen. Well, that wasn't my experience, because at the time, I had a dog. I had a Cocker Spaniel. I had a cat. I had a cockatoo, a big white bird. I had a cockatoo. I had an aquarium, and I had 2 parakeets. Yes, I know. Too many pets. I know, but this was a long time ago. My point being, I had pets that encompassed land, sea, and air. And not one of those animals reacted in the least before that earthquake came. Not one. So I think there's a little bit of bunk to that, or at least that was my experience. I kind of have to laugh about it. Kathy, were Betty and Joan ever friends? Oh, dear God, no. No, they were never, ever friends. The thing with the feud, the famous feud, there was a lot of truth to it. But it was Betty Davis's one-time stepson. It was when she was married to, was it William Sherry, the artist? He was, I think, her third husband. He's the one that she had her daughter BD with, her only birth child. But she did have a stepson, and they remained close. And I was reading a little thing with him where he said that Betty confided to him, and he said, we weren't really having a feud. that was all PR for the movie. But Betty also was very clear they were not friends. They were very, very different women. Um, they worked together and they did a very famous film together, and they'll be forever associated with each other. Let's see here. Oh yes, Maya, your beautiful little kitten, 4.5 months. Oh yes, yes, I know that show. I have that show. I have a lot of the Carol Burnett shows on DVD, and it is true. An earthquake happened while she was with the Jackson Five when it happened. And this was, I think, in 1974. Yeah, and you're right, as you pointed out, she stayed in character as the music teacher, and they just waited until it was over. And again, most of us who've gone through quakes here in LA know it's going to pass in a few seconds. But like I said, with the newscaster, overhead lights and things, and there is a very real danger of those things falling down. So maybe it was a little braver than Carol realized she was being brave or being nonchalant. And so it was 1971. Oh, that's right. That's right. LA did have a big quake in 1971. Yeah, thank you about that. So anyway, I'm at well past the 45-minute point. Does anybody have a question or anything else you'd like me to address, talk about before I hang it up for today until next Monday? Anybody? I'll just wait a quick second here. Otherwise, I'm just going to sign out. Join me tomorrow. I do Dr. Whimsy Anderson's show, Taco Tuesdays, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, on her channel, The Oracle of Whimsy. What's that word? Did you meet Diana Sarah Carey? No, I don't know who that is. I'm not familiar with that person. Maybe you could tell me who she is. But no, I definitely didn't meet her. At least I'm not aware of ever meeting her. But anyway, I do Taco Tuesdays with my dear friend, Dr. Whimsy Anderson. I'm posting videos on my channel, Chuck's Captivating Chronicles. Oh, wait, Baby Peggy. Baby Peggy. Okay, I've heard of Baby Peggy. I just didn't realize the name behind her. But no, I didn't meet her. No. Been lucky to meet quite a few, but not her. And some of these people I would meet at they have a thing here called the Hollywood shows, where the people have tables, and you can approach them. Usually you have to pay a fee to get an autograph, get a picture or something. And I used to go to those back in the 80s and 90s, when a lot of these older stars, silent screen stars, people like that, were still living. It was much more interesting, in my opinion, than it is to go to the shows now. But so I would encounter people that way. Let's see. Oh, yes. Thank you, Kathy, for your sweet words. And Ward, nothing to be sorry about. You stumped me there. I couldn't place the name, but I have heard of Baby Peggy. Anyway, I'm going to do my best to get some new videos up. I've had to scale back on the channel because I've got a writing project right now that I'm collaborating on with a therapist friend of mine. I'm not at liberty to discuss that either, and that's mostly at her request. She wants to keep it quiet right now, but I'm doing a writing project. I'm working on these paintings. I always have lists of things I want to accomplish. I stay pretty busy. But it was my dear friend Pam of Pomona Remembers who said, instead of focusing on the to-do list, why don't you focus on something called the ta-da list? List what you accomplished today. And I'm guilty of not doing that. I tend to focus on, I didn't get this done. I didn't know I'm behind on this. But it's a good feeling when you look back and you see a list of things you can check off that you did get done. So I highly suggest everyone do a ta-da list. It's really good for your morale. So at this point, I think I'm going to sign off because I'm going to have dinner with my dear friend Anastasia Pavlov. She's been a guest on this show several times. I talked about Julie Andrews and Carol Burnett being like two houses on fire and they get together. Well, that's the way Anastasia and I are. We get really wild and go in some crazy, crazy directions. But then that's the way we are in real life anyway. And we decided to just start sharing that with everyone. So anyway, everyone, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me. It means a lot to me. And I appreciate your comments that you give me and just your ongoing support. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next Monday. Goodbye.